There are moments in law enforcement when the weight of a badge becomes unbearable, not because of the dangers faced on the street, but because of the corruption festering within the walls meant to protect and serve. This is the story of one such moment. A moment when a single act of defiance shattered years of silence, exposed a reign of tyranny, and reminded an entire precinct what it truly means to wear the uniform with honor. This is the untold story of Officer Marcus Webb and the night he stood alone against Captain Howard Dennison, a man who had turned power into poison. The year was 1998. The precinct was the 47th district in a mid-sized Midwestern city where the streets knew violence, but the station house knew something darker. Fear. Not fear of criminals or gangs, but fear of one man, Captain Howard Dennison. Dennison had been with the department for 23 years. He'd climbed the ranks not through merit or valor, but through intimidation, political maneuvering, and an uncanny ability to make problems disappear, along with the officers who dared create them. His office was a throne room. His word was law, and his temper was legendary. Officers walked on eggshells around him. Reports were falsified to match his narratives. Evidence was mishandled to close cases quickly. Complaints against him vanished into filing cabinets that never saw the light of day. The precinct had become a kingdom ruled by fear, and Dennison was its unchallenged king. Then came Marcus Webb. Webb was 24 years old, fresh out of the academy, with ideals still intact and a belief that the badge on his chest meant something sacred. He was quiet, observant, and possessed a moral compass that refused to bend. His training officer noticed it immediately, the way Webb questioned procedures that seemed wrong, the way he documented everything meticulously, the way he looked at Dennison with neither fear nor reverence. But something more dangerous. Disappointment. You're going to have a short career. Kid, his training officer warned him one night after Webb refused to alter a report at Dennison's indirect suggestion. You don't understand how things work here, but Webb did understand. He understood perfectly, and that was the problem. The tension built slowly over Webb's first 6 months, small acts of integrity that Dennison noticed like splinters under his skin. Webb refusing to ignore a violation. Webb documenting inconsistencies. Webb treating suspects with the dignity Dennison had long forgotten they deserved. And then came the Rodriguez case. Maria Rodriguez was a 16-year-old girl who accused a local businessman, a man with deep pockets and deeper connections to city officials, of assault. The case landed on Webb's desk during a night shift. He took her statement with care, followed every protocol, and built a solid case that should have led to an arrest. Instead, Captain Dennison buried it. Webb found the file 3 days later, stamped insufficient evidence, and closed without investigation. When he confronted Dennison privately, the captain's response was cold and absolute. You don't have the experience to judge what cases we pursue. This matter is closed. But Webb wouldn't let it close. He continued gathering evidence on his own time. He interviewed witnesses Dennison had dismissed. He documented every obstruction, every suspicious decision. Every time the captain steered investigations away from powerful people, the precinct watched in horrified fascination as the quiet rookie refused to break. They knew what was coming. They'd seen it before. Dennison destroyed officers who challenged him, ruined careers, manufactured disciplinary actions, made life so unbearable that good cops quit or transferred. Everyone waited for Webb to fall. It happened during roll call on a Tuesday night in November. The shift was assembled, 32 officers packed into the briefing room. Captain Dennison stood at the podium, running through assignments with his usual authoritarian efficiency. Then he paused, his eyes finding Marcus Webb in the third row. Officer Webb, Dennison's voice cut through the room like a blade. I've reviewed your reports from last week. Sloppy work? Unacceptable procedures. You're suspended from patrol duties pending a disciplinary review. The room froze. Everyone knew what this was. This was the beginning of the end. The opening move in Dennison's playbook to destroy another officer who wouldn't fall in line. Webb stood slowly. The silence in that room was suffocating. No, sir. 2 words. Quiet. Absolute. Dennison's face flushed crimson. Excuse me? Webb reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder, thick, organized, devastating. No, sir. I won't be suspended for doing my job correctly, but you should be removed for failing to do yours. He walked to the front of the room, every eye following him. He opened the folder on the podium, right in front of Dennison, and began to speak with a calm that shook the foundations of that precinct. Rodriguez case. Closed without investigation. Suspect is a donor to the mayor's campaign. He laid down the first document. Harrison case. Evidence lost in your custody. The suspect walked. Another document. 12 complaints against you from officers in this precinct. All buried by internal affairs, who you play golf with every Sunday. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Dennison reached for the folder, but Webb pulled it back. I've made copies, sir. The district attorney has one. So does the state police. And as of this morning, so does the media. In that instant, the power shifted. The king fell, and 32 officers watched in stunned silence as years of corruption crumbled in the face of one rookie's unshakable integrity. The next 72 hours were chaos. Captain Howard Dennison was placed on immediate administrative leave. Internal Affairs, under pressure from state investigators, launched a full audit of the precinct's cases going back 5 years. What they found was a systematic pattern of corruption, buried cases, falsified reports, evidence tampering, and witness intimidation. The investigation revealed that Dennison had been protecting a network of influential individuals, businessmen, politicians, and even other law enforcement officials in exchange for favors, money, and career advancement. The Rodriguez case was just one of dozens that had been sacrificed on the altar of his ambition. Officers came forward. Some had been silenced for years. Others had transferred to escape him. Their testimonies painted a picture of a precinct held hostage by one man's ego and greed. But the most powerful testimonies came from the officers who had been in that roll call room. When Webb stood up, one veteran officer told investigators, "It was like someone turned the lights on. We'd all been walking in darkness for so long, we'd forgotten what it looked like to stand up straight." The precinct changed overnight. The fear that had permeated every shift, every decision, every interaction, it evaporated like mist in sunlight. Officers began doing their jobs the way they'd been trained, the way they'd wanted to all along, but had been too afraid to attempt. Marcus Webb became something unexpected, a symbol, not of rebellion for rebellion's sake, but of what law enforcement was supposed to be, accountable, principled, and willing to police itself. The media descended, of course. The story had everything. A corrupt captain, a courageous rookie, a department in crisis. But Webb refused most interviews. He issued one statement through the department's press liaison. "I didn't do anything heroic. I did what we all swore an oath to do, serve with integrity and uphold the law, even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult. If that's considered heroic, then we've set our standards far too low." Captain Dennison was ultimately charged with obstruction of justice, tampering with evidence, and abuse of authority. He pleaded guilty to avoid trial and served 18 months in prison, a sentence many considered too lenient. He lost his pension, his badge, and whatever reputation he'd once held. But the real consequences rippled far beyond one man's downfall. The 47th District underwent a complete cultural transformation. New leadership was brought in, leaders committed to transparency and accountability. Training programs were implemented focusing on ethical decision-making and officer welfare. A confidential reporting system was established so officers could report misconduct without fear of retaliation. Most importantly, the story of that November night became required learning at the academy. Every graduating class heard about Officer Marcus Webb and the moment he chose principle over self-preservation. The moral was clear and uncompromising. Corruption thrives in silence. Injustice feasts on compliance. And sometimes, the most powerful thing an officer can do is simply refuse to look away, refuse to be quiet, refuse to let wrong become normalized. Respect cannot be demanded through intimidation. Authority not earned through integrity is merely tyranny wearing a badge. And no rank, no tenure, no political connection places any officer above the law they've sworn to uphold. The badge is a promise to the community, to justice, and to the truth. When that promise is broken, it doesn't just damage one case or hurt one victim. It undermines the entire foundation of law enforcement and erodes public trust that takes generations to build. Marcus Webb understood something that Captain Dennison had forgotten. The uniform doesn't grant power. It demands responsibility. And every officer, from rookie to captain, must answer to the same standard, or the whole system collapses. 27 years have passed since that night in November 1998. Officer Marcus Webb is now Captain Marcus Webb, commanding the 47th District, the same precinct where he once stood alone against corruption. The transformation of that district has become a model studied by law enforcement agencies across the country. But more than policies or procedures, what endured was the story. In every police academy, in every precinct break room, in whispered conversations between rookies, trying to navigate the moral complexities of law enforcement. The legend of Webb's defiance lives on. They call it the Webb Standard now, a reminder that doing the right thing isn't always popular, isn't always safe, but is always necessary. Officers from across the nation have written to Webb over the years, sharing their own stories of standing up to corruption, of refusing to compromise their principles, of remembering that November night when one rookie proved that courage doesn't always wear stripes. The Rodriguez case, the one that started it all, was reopened and prosecuted successfully. Maria Rodriguez, now in her 40s, became a victim's advocate, helping others find their voice when the system tries to silence them. She credits Webb with teaching her that justice delayed isn't always justice denied. Sometimes it's justice gathering. Strength. The officers who witnessed Webb's confrontation with Dennison have scattered to departments across the country, but they carry that moment with them. Several have risen to leadership positions, and they speak openly about the impact of watching integrity triumph over intimidation. "It changed how I saw everything," one of them said in a recent interview. "Before that night, I thought survival meant keeping your head down. After that night, I understood that survival without integrity isn't really surviving, it's just existing." Webb showed us that we could do better, that we had to do better. Captain Webb still keeps the original folder from that November night in his office, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. When young officers come to him struggling with ethical dilemmas, facing pressure to compromise, wondering if standing up is worth the cost, he tells them the story. Not to glorify himself, but to pass on the lesson. The badge is heavy, he tells them, not because of what it's made of, but because of what it represents. Every decision you make either honors that weight or diminishes it. There are no small compromises in law enforcement. Every time you look away from wrong, you make it easier to look away the next time. Every time you stay silent in the face of injustice, you teach others that silence is acceptable. But every time you stand up, even when you're standing alone, you remind everyone what we're supposed to be. In his last academy address before the newest graduating class, Captain Webb shared words that now hang in precincts across the country. They will tell you that courage is facing down criminals and danger in the streets, and that is courage. But the hardest courage, the kind that defines your career and your character, is the courage to face down corruption in your own ranks. To say no when everyone else is saying yes. To stand alone when standing together would be easier. That's when you discover what kind of officer you truly are. That's when the badge becomes more than metal, it becomes meaning. The 47th District has been corruption-free for 27 years. Dennison's name is rarely spoken there anymore, not out of respect, but because his reign of tyranny has been eclipsed by a culture of accountability. He tried so hard to destroy. And somewhere in that precinct, probably right now, A young officer is facing their own moment of truth, a decision between easy and right, between silence and voice, between compliance and courage, but they won't face it without knowing that someone stood before them. Someone showed them it could be done. Someone proved that integrity, even when it costs everything, is the only thing worth having. That's the legend. That's the standard. That's what one rookie officer on one November night gave to law enforcement forever. The captain tried to break him, but the rookie's defiance exposed everything. And in doing so, he didn't just save his own soul, he saved the soul of an entire precinct. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe for more powerful stories from states of justice.